I was thinking that first song, and no longer a slave to fear. No, no, she's been helping out, and this is her first week, like actually, on her own. So I'm sure she'll do fine. But just a little joke. Hey, we're getting back on track after the holidays. We're not going to Luke. But we're gonna jump back into the Gospel of Mark, and I'm sure you've missed it. And it's kind of like, for some of you get some time off around Christmas vacation. Maybe you take end of year vacation. I know people have so much vacation saved up they take off like most of December. I'm not that guy. Anyway, sorry. But, there's something like, it's tough to sort of get back to work sometimes, and you kind of forget things, you're out of your routine, you know what I mean? And so I kind of feel like we're out of our routine for Mark a little bit, and so I may have to remind you of what was going on in the book of Mark when we left off. And if you have one of these old school things called Bibles that are paper, you can open it up at Mark chapter 11. We'll pop them up there on the screen too. But we're gonna jump right in, and we're gonna talk about the book of Mark. And we're gonna talk about Jesus. And so in Mark chapter 11, starting in verse 27, because we left off at 11:26. No, we left off there right before that. And so it's like this, again, they entered Jerusalem. As Jesus was walking through the temple area, the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law and elders came up to him. They demanded, "By what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you the right to do them?" Now, these things, because it's been a few weeks. We took off, we celebrated about Christmas. You probably forgot what these things were at this point. You're just like, well, it's Jesus stuff. There was something Jesus was doing. But we're talking, if you remember, we did a sermon. Again, it was one of the weirdest sermons I've ever preached. Yeah, you're never going to live that down. What she meant was it's a weird text. There's some things in the Bible that at first time you read it, you're like, what? And you've been in church long enough, you're like, oh yeah, Jesus curses a fig tree. Yeah, well, that doesn't seem normal the first time you read it. And so Jesus gets mad at a fig tree. We talked about that. You can listen to the podcast. It was really this symbol of fruitfulness that wasn't happening. And so it's sort of an object lesson, and a fig tree took the brunt of that. And then there's the clearing of the temple. And this is like, generally, we're thinking Easter time around this. Jesus comes in and he clears the temple, and they're buying and selling stuff there. And it wasn't so much the buying and selling that was the problem. It was, if you didn't get your sacrifice there, it didn't get approved. And it was kind of like when you go, you can go to the Eagles game. You can't go to the Steelers game. But, if you go to the Eagles game, today, and you go to buy a hot dog, it's like $40 for a hot dog, and it's slightly less at Wawa. And so, they're ripping people off. And, and whenever you travel, you have to get money in that country generally. And, often there's places that you can just go to an ATM now and get money. But a lot of places, like, you'd go and you'd get money, but the exchange rate wouldn't be so good. And because your temple taxes had to be paid with certain coin. So basically, everyone was getting ripped off. And so Jesus is like, hey, not down with that. He's flipping some tables and everything. He's flipping out. Anyway, that's where we leave off. It's a picture, because again, I think people, when they think of Jesus, they think like wimpy guy, and he's always carrying a sheep on top of his, and that's, shoulders, and that's a beautiful image because he is the shepherd. But Jesus he's a man who's a carpenter, and if you've ever known a carpenter, you shake a carpenter's hand, it's like touching muscle. It's impressive. And so Jesus comes in. He's flipping the tables, he's done all this stuff, he's done these things, and that's what the religious leaders are going, hey, you're doing all this stuff, so you can read these things and kind of forget what these things were. That's what these things are. So Jesus is doing this stuff. He's sort of upsetting the temple establishment. It's supposed to be a house of prayer. People are getting ripped off. And so they come to him and they go, what authority do you have? What right do you have? We want to see your credentials. It's like you go to a doctor, like you kind of want to see a diploma on the wall that's like, not from like, I don't know, kids college. You want more than their nursery school certificate. You're like, you're doing heart surgery on me tomorrow. I'd really like to see where you did your residency or something. I want to know you have some credentials. I was at a wrestling tournament all day yesterday. Well, not all day, but most of the day. There's certain, when you coach in a wrestling tournament, there's like 2 seats up on the mat for the coaches. If somebody sits in that seat, you kind of want to assume they have the authority to sit there. Like, that's not like, oh, the stands were full, so I'm going to go sit in the seat next to the coach. It's like, no, he'd be looking at me like, what are you doing? Actually, I knew the coach, so he'd be okay with it. But, Jesus is he's doing some things that show authority that people don't think he has, especially the religious leaders. So he's sitting in that coach's seat. It'd be like he comes up and he stands on the sidelines of the football game, at the Eagles game, just kind of like pulls up there like, what are you doing here? Security escorts you out. And so people, people are a little upset. And, there's power and authority too, which are kind of 2 different things if you think about it. So, power is the ability to do something. Now, if something happens, we have a car accident outside and everyone's mad, as a mob, we're not going to do this. We have the power to exert what we consider justice on the person who, maybe they run over a kid, which I hate when people, the one time I got upset and someone at the church, I remember they laughed because, I got upset. This person was driving through a festival we were doing, and we were making balloon animals, and I got angry and hit their car with a balloon animal. But I got mad because I'm like, you're driving through there, like, hey, you gotta stop, because you're gonna hit some kid because you're mad because nobody bought your stuff, because no one liked your stuff because you had bad stuff, and you're selling at this festival. Now you're driving through. Anyway, so a mob has the power to exert their justice, but they don't have the authority. The court has the authority. And so they're kind of, Jesus, where do you get this authority? Think of it another way. Think of, when my son was like 5, we'd wrestle on the bed. He could not beat me. Well, he still can't beat me. But at 5 years old, I can overpower my son. And I have, because he's my son, I have a level of authority over him. Now, you might be able to wrestle my 5-year-old son, who's not so much 5 anymore. Now he's a little too big for a lot of you to wrestle. But you may be able to overpower him, but you don't have authority. And so Jesus is doing some things that they're just like, what right do you have to do this? It's not just the miracles and things that you're doing that we see power in, but what gives you the right? What gives you the authority to do this? And so Jesus clearly had power. And if we look at his ministry, we look at the things he does, Jesus is healing the sick. That takes a certain level of power, right? Jesus is raising the dead. That takes power. Jesus is driving out demons, and that's when he gets into controversy earlier with them. They're like, well, you're driving out demons by, Satan, and he's like, that does not make any sense. You can listen to that one. Jesus, if you remember, he's refreshed with who Jesus is. Jesus, the paralytic, they tear a hole in the ceiling. I wanted to do that here, but it's such a pretty ceiling. But, I would love, someday I'm going to get to preach at a church, and I'm going to bust through the drywall. It'll be worth the drywall repair later, and Bob will help me anyway. It'd be a great object lesson. See, Bob will do it. He's a great guy. But they lower him down. He's hanging there, and Jesus is like, "Hey, your sins are forgiven." And it's that awkward moment because you're like, he didn't get lowered down to get his sins forgiven. He wants to walk, and everyone's kind of like staring at him, and they're kind of going, who is this who thinks he can forgive sins? He goes, "Hey, I know what you're thinking." And so, what's easier to say? Jesus says, "What's easier to say? Your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk?" Which is easier to say? I think, I would argue the opposite. It's easier to say your sins are forgiven because no one can tell. You don't change colors. Well, he was red and it drained out, it's, he turned green. He's sinless. I don't know. But he could say, you can say whatever. You can say your sins are forgiven. You can't tell. But Jesus says, "Hey, get up and walk." And the guy gets up and walks. And he's using this to demonstrate that he has this authority. And it was one thing when he's doing this off, in the other towns. But now Jesus is showing up on their turf. You know, the temple is run by these religious leaders, you know, and they're like, what gives you the authority to do these things? You know, what's the nature of it? What's the source? And Jesus says this in verse 29. I'll tell you by what authority I do these things if you answer one question. Jesus replied, did John's authority to baptize, this is John the Baptist, come from heaven, or was it merely human? Answer me. He gives them one question. You know, he even makes it multiple choice here. You know, for those of you who don't like the essay questions, you don't like writing paragraphs, this is A or B. A, from God. You know, B, you know, something he just made up. So A from God, or B, just John made this thing up. And you know, so it says in verse 31, they talked among themselves, and they say, you know, if we say from heaven, he will ask why we didn't believe John. But if we dare say it was merely human, but do dare say it was merely human, they were afraid of what the people would do because everyone believed that John was a prophet. And again, these are sort of political kind of minded people. They're not like elected. You know, you are the religious leaders because of certain things, and you know, by birth and different. But they're sort of mindful of the politics of the situation. They want the people behind them. So they have a little political motive here. And they're kind of a dilemma. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Because Jesus asks him what's a really kind of a tough question for him. You know, they're kind of like, they're saying, not just his baptism, but like what his whole ministry. This John the Baptist guy, is this a God thing or a human thing? And so I picture, and this is maybe because of all the sports I played, I picture a football huddle now because, you know, I picture them huddling up, getting together because it says they talked among themselves. You know, I don't imagine going out for a cafe or something. I imagine kind of gathering together and they're like, okay, guy number one's like, okay, can't say it's from God because we really weren't on board with that, you know, and so that's going to look awkward and bad. Guy number two's like, you know, you can't say it's merely human because people will freak out. You know, if human, you know, we should have taken a harder stand against him. And remember that time he called us a brood of vipers when we went out to get baptized? So it was kind of awkward. One, he called us brood of vipers. Two, we'd gone out to be baptized, so we must have believed it to some degree. You know, guy number three. There's always guy number three. He's like, why don't we just say we don't know? And so verse 33 says the father replied, we don't know. Jesus gives them one question. He even makes it multiple choice. You know, A from God, B something made up, or C they add. I don't know. Maybe if you have a teenager, you understand that one. I don't know. But and he responded, "They won't tell you by what. Then I won't tell you by what authority I do these things." Yeah, Jesus always answers good, doesn't he? You're like, man, I wish I'd answered like that. He's got some good ones coming up too. Jesus is not trying to dodge a tough question with a tough one. I just always think it was kind of snarky. You know, like Jesus is like, oh, well, where did this come from? But I think more than I read it kind of, you know, the answer really reveals something about them, doesn't it? The answer shows, hey, we're not really concerned about the truth. We're just concerned about how it affects us. And no amount of explanation on Jesus' part is going to win him over, right? This is like the irate neighbor who comes over to yell at you because your stereo is too loud. You can't apologize, say sorry, it's the Alexa remote and I don't know how to turn it down. Turn stereo down, you know. They're upset. And he says, it's kind of a package deal. You can't take John without Jesus. They go together. They're like peanut butter and jelly. You know, peanut butter and jelly, great sandwich. Peanut butter, not a good sandwich. What's wrong with you? No, sorry. It's Reese's peanut butter cups. I mean, I'm going food today. Some of you are going to be hungry for the snacks that we have upstairs. I'm ready for the coffee. Man, I made coffee this morning. It was a great cup of coffee, beautiful cup of coffee, and it's still at home on the counter. So I'll get a Reese's peanut butter cup later, maybe that. It's ultimately, it's not what they don't know. It's that they're unwilling to accept who Jesus is. They're unwilling to accept his authority. And Jesus kind of calls them out on that by asking them this question. As both are sent from heaven, you can't really have one without the other. And all the political authority, all they see is like political liability of what Jesus is doing. they're afraid he's going to kind of, one, displace them, but two, he's going to cause a problem with the Romans because there's this weird, awkward tension. The Romans let them kind of do their own thing as long as it's not causing problems, and they're sort of the part of this establishment. They benefit from it. They want to kind of keep it there. And any answer Jesus gives, they're probably going to twist, right? And then this is where I was going to stop in the scripture, but then I kept thinking last night, late at 8 o'clock. After the wrestling tournament, I kept thinking, man, maybe I need to go a little further. And since I haven't had espresso, I'm going at a normal pace, so this will take 2 days. No, I'm kidding. But Jesus really kind of explains things afterwards. Now, if you have a Bible that's like a physical Bible, you'll see this with the digital versions too. Chapter 11 is here, if you happen to have one that looks a lot like mine, and then chapter 12 begins there. Now, the numbers are not originally part of the text. We put those in later, to sort of help us find things in there. It's a lot easier for me to tell you where something is in the book of Mark. You just say, hey, today you're going to be in chapter 11, than to go, we're about 2/3 of the way in, somewhere in the book of Mark. Go ahead and find that. And so we put chapters and verses in there to help us find it. There's a long history to that. We can have a great conversation later over coffee about how that happens. But, we're going to start into chapter 12. But for me, I always feel like when we're starting a new chapter, it's a new thing. This is a continued conversation. We just happen to have a 12 in there. It says, then Jesus began teaching them with stories, because Jesus is explaining his authority with this next story. And so Jesus' answer is a little further. It says, then Jesus began teaching a story. It says, a man planted a vineyard. I know most of us have planted vineyards. I know we planted one last weekend. No, I'm kidding. This is an agricultural society, and planting a vineyard would be something you plant, and then it's like, once you plant a vineyard, you kind of reap the benefits of it for a long time, And so it says, a man planted a vineyard, he built a wall around it, dug a pit for pressing out the grape juice, and built a lookout tower. He made this real nice. He set it all up. And then he leased the vineyard to tenant farmers and moved to another country. So he sets this up. This is an investment. He's going to kind of reap the profits and the benefits of this. Some of you have rental houses, that kind of thing. That's that sort of thing. He set it up. He set up this business, and then he takes off. At the time of the grape harvest, he sent one of his servants to collect his share of the crop. But the farmers grabbed the servant, beat him up, and sent him back empty-handed. The owner then sent another servant, but they insulted him and beat him over the head. The next servant that he sent was killed. Others he sent were either beaten or killed until there was only one left, his son whom he loved. The owner finally sent him saying, surely they respect my son. And so he's sending the rent collectors, and they're getting the beat down. And it's kind of hard for us to think, well, why are you sending the son now? But he's thinking, hey, my son has my authority. My son, can't get back to that word authority. See where we're going with this? The son has authority. So they send the son thinking, surely they're going to act right now. And so, it says, the tenant farmers said to one another, here comes the heir to this estate. Let's kill him and get the estate for ourselves. So they grabbed him and murdered him and threw his body out of the vineyard. And what do you suppose the owner of the vineyard would do? Jesus asked. I tell you, he'll come and kill those farmers and lease the vineyard to others. Didn't you ever read in the scriptures? The stone the builders have rejected has now become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful to see. Now, if you have time, if you're the kind of person who likes to study deeper, I want you later to open up Isaiah 5. Read that story. Because you're going to read that story and you're going to go, man, that's a lot like this story. Now, the religious leaders would have known that story out of Isaiah 5, which is a similar thing. God talks about, God likens Israel to planting a vineyard, and things play out in a similar way. And God doesn't get the fruit he expects. And then there's judgment. Isaiah 5 verse 7 says, the nation of Israel is in the vineyard of the Lord's heaven's armies. The people of Judah are his pleasant garden. He expected a crop of justice, but instead he found oppression. He expected to find righteousness, but instead he heard cries of violence. So God's expecting one fruit and gets another. And so there's kind of some cool history of this, you expected good fruit, got something else. Now, one time, Josh and I were driving in the car, and Josh is my son, if you don't know him. We're driving in the car, and he hands me some candy. Now, I like candy. Anyone not like candy? Oh, what is wrong with you? It's candy. Anyway, so, I wasn't paying attention. He offers me some candy. I reach over, I grab a handful, throw it in my mouth. It was Sour Patch something. I did everything I could to keep my mouth closed because I expected something sweet and good. Gummy bears, maybe, I got, I don't know, those of you like sour? Like, anyone like sour candy? There's something wrong with you. No. I kind of get where it's good, but not in a whole handful. Josh's like, I can't believe you did a whole handful. I'm like, yeah, I'm just manly like that. I remember I was at the Camden Light because I was like, I can't spit it out. I don't have a tissue. It's a waste of candy. But God expected good food. He didn't get it. And so Jesus telling the same parable, he's saying, you expected good fruit. The Son has come. The one with authority has come. But I'm not getting the fruit I expected. Now, verse 10, 11, it says, Psalm 18, the stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. This is wonderful to see. Just so you know, that's a quote out of the same psalm that when Jesus came in, the triumphal entry, they're using the same psalm. So they would have been familiar with that song. And so the religious leaders wanted, and then it says verse 12, we're jumping back into Mark. It says, the religious leaders wanted to arrest Jesus because they realized he was telling this story against them. They were the wicked farmers. It was pretty clear, what side was who in this story. It said, but they were afraid of the crowd, again, political, so they left and went away. They got their answer ultimately, right? And Jesus kind of just lays it out there, hey, there's this judgment and it's coming. Now, here's the thing. This is Wednesday. Friday's coming. Yep. And I can't preach that sermon. I wish I could. It's Friday. But Sunday's coming. Some of you have heard that sermon. Much better sermon than you'll ever get from me. Would encourage you to go listen to that later. But, he's close to the crucifixion here. We're kind of breaking down this little section, again, just before Easter. Now, ultimately, when you look at this, and you look at the main tension in this story is between who? The religious leaders and Jesus. And it's easy for me to read this and go, man, those dumb religious leaders, right? Man, they got Jesus all wrong. They're questioning his authority. Anyone else there with me? Like, yeah. But here's the thing. Do we do this? Sometimes I think we do with Jesus' authority because it's one thing to say you believe in Jesus. It's one thing to say I go to church. It's one thing to say I'm on board. It's another thing sometimes to live it out in our daily life. Because we're fine when Jesus has authority over parts of our life, but sometimes when it's parts that we like, we want to hold out. And if we're honest, if I lined this up and from one end of Broad Street to the other, and we, kind of from, point A, fully committed to Jesus, living it all out, to, you'll put it by the end of the track. We'll put you on the other side of the tracks. That side of Broad Street that goes on the other side of the tracks. There's railroad tracks up there for those of you who have never gone that far out there. The whole history of the town of Wyoming and why it's here has to do with the railroad. But that's not part of the sermon. I'll tell you that later. But if we lined you up, on one end you'd have day by day journey to submit all about it. To no, I'm not on board. And if we're honest, I think we struggle walking up and down that street because there's certain things that we like to do. There's certain sins we like to hold on to that we just kind of get stuck in and have trouble giving up. I've told you, my favorite analogy for sin is, I worked in this factory, and my job was to, a lot of things. It was whatever they needed done, because I was the low man on the totem pole. Some of you have been there in that job. And my job was to cut plastic off the extruder when they were cleaning it out, and I was supposed to kick it over to the side, and then it got stuck on my boot. Next thing you know, there's a giant piece of molten plastic covering half the floor. My boots are stuck in it. I can't get out. I had to unlace my boots, jump out, trying not to burn my feet, and walk barefoot into the break room to tell the operator, yeah, I messed up. but molten sticky plastic is like sin. We think we can handle these things, and we're kicking it away. We just a little bit, and then it gets stuck on us, and then we get trapped in it. And a lot of us have sins and junk that we like. It's easy for me to judge other people when they sin differently, but sometimes we hold on to our own stuff. So I think sometimes we're a little more like the religious leaders than we think, because we can hold on to these things. And sometimes the gospel demands come up against something we want. I've often said, I think two of the biggest challenges to the way I live, and where our culture believes, sex and money. And with my kids, we're constantly talking about sex and money in our house. Not because we're weird, but because our culture has different values for those than we do. Our culture says you should be all about those and do whatever you want, whatever feels good, whatever, so sexuality, a little different. And then money, that's like the American sin we like to look over in the church, because, it's not a sin to make money. It's not a sin to be good at making money. I pray that some of you are good at making money. But at some point, some of us cross over that line, and we become all about the money. And it becomes an idol in our life. I think in our culture, financial prosperity is an idol. We struggle with it. You go overseas sometimes to see how people live, and you start to reevaluate then, how we live. Again, not a bad thing to have money. I pray God blesses your businesses. But we have to worry, sometimes do we have possessions, or do our possessions have us? And so there's lots of things that we kind of have to look at and go, does this have me? Now, we may not turn to Jesus and go, you don't have authority here, but we'll ignore him. I'm not saying he doesn't have authority. Now, following Jesus, it doesn't mean it's like a cult, like you just have to kind of do all these things, and I'm going to give you a list of things you have to do today, and don't do this, don't do that. It's not just rules, don't smoke or chew or go with girls who do. Some of you grew up in like Pentecostal church, you know what I mean? I don't know why that makes me laugh every time. But what following Jesus means is doing the things he did. It means living out things the way he lived out. And I think when I think of the Sermon on the Mount, good sermon, right? Yeah, anyone? It's the sermon Jesus preached when he was on the Mount. It's different than the Sermon on the Plain, which is when Jesus was flying over Jerusalem. No, not that kind of plane. One on plane, one on Mount. And he says things like, forgive other people. That's hard. But that's part of living the Jesus life is, are you going to forgive? Are you going to love versus hate? I remember long story, I was with someone, we were talking about politics. I'm sort of apolitical, I don't know. I'll talk politics. I'll probably talk one side or the other to annoy you if we're in a debate. But, I was with somebody, and they were just talking about the other political party, and they were just they were just hateful. And I'm just like, I was like, if someone from a different political party wanted, to borrow something of mine, I'd give it to them. They're like, I wouldn't. I'm like, man, that's just too much hate. Hate's too big a burden to bear. little Martin Luther King on me there. But that's how we are. And sometimes we don't want to live the Jesus way if we're careful, because we don't want to give him authority over every aspect of our life. Following Jesus means he has authority over every part of our life, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's in areas we don't want. And for me, I distinctly remember giving my life to Jesus slowly. Like, I'll give you this piece. I don't care that much about this piece. I'll give you this piece. I don't care that much about this piece. And you get into like, but I like these. I like this sin. I want to hold on to that one. Do you want this one? It's like, or some people use the analogy of a house. It's like, we'll give them like different rooms in our house. We'll give them the study. Maybe we'll give them the TV room, but not the bedroom. We'll give them different aspects. Jesus wants the whole house. He wants to move in. He wants to have that right. And then we've used the term, and a guy wrote a book called The Christian Atheist, and I think it sounds like a funny term at first. I haven't read the book. I had it, someone borrowed it, so if you could return it back to me so I can, because I never pay attention to where my books went. but it's often a process, because sometimes we're Christian, but then we live as an atheist in different parts of our lives. We don't fully submit to Jesus in those areas. And so, we really have this choice, are we going to put ourselves under his authority and live the way he wants? Or are we going to hold on to things that we like? And then ultimately there's this idea of judgment, which I think a lot of us, we don't like. We don't mind so much when the bad guys get it in the end. So maybe the judgment in this parable doesn't bother you because you're like, yeah, those bad religious leaders got it. but the truth is, there is judgment. We don't like the idea of judgment, but it doesn't make it less true. We don't like the idea of judgment, but I think the encouraging thing about all of this is Jesus goes through judgment for us on the cross, so we don't have to. And the encouraging thing is, Jesus takes his authority, and then he puts all the guilt and shame of us on himself and dies for us. So ultimately, we can live this free life. And for me, the gospel is encouraging because, there is the junk. There is the way I hold on to authority. There is the way I don't sometimes want to give every part of my life over to him. But in the middle of that, we have grace. We have a Savior who dies for us so that we can live free in this new way. Jesus dies so that we can have eternal life and a future, and true life now. Romans 12:2 says this. It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. We're not meant to be broken forever. We're made to be transformed and to be changed into his image. And for me, that's one of the exciting things about the gospel. Because we get to become new people if we allow his authority into our lives over every aspect, we become like he wants us to be. And so I want to encourage you as the band comes back to play, if maybe this is the first time